always had sort of mixed opinions on any form of web development that's not just pure coding. But that said, the team at Wix reached out about their new product, Wix Studio, and it might actually be changing that. Essentially, it's a web creation platform that's built for freelancers and agencies that allows you to use sort of an intuitive drag and drop system for building websites. But at the same time, you can also write custom CSS and JavaScript, and you can even do things like installing NPM packages, connecting databases, and even building out an entire backend in a VS Code-based IDE. So theoretically, it should give you most of the benefits of custom coding, along with most of the benefits of more intuitive drag and drop systems that can make it much easier and more efficient to actually build websites. So what I want to do in this video is actually test this out. So I'm going to build the exact same website, or as close as I can get to it, 2 different times. And then I'll compare the experience and give some of my own thoughts. And of course, a big thank you to Wix for sponsoring this video. Okay, so this is what Wix Studio looks like. So here we have our website. This is just the default blank canvas. You can see it has this header, this sort of main section, and a footer. Up here, we can see the size of the canvas. We can see what it's going to look like on different screen sizes. Then on the left here, we have all these different tabs to essentially actually change things. So first of all, we have this add elements section, which we'll be using a lot, where we can add things like text and images and whatnot. And then we also have our layers, which works sort of similar to like Photoshop if you've ever used that. But essentially this represents our DOM, so all of the elements actually on the page. And then here we have our site pages. So if we want a multi-page website, we can do that. Here we have some global sections. So these are sections that can appear on every single page. We also have some styles. So we can sort of set what typography we want to be using and what colors we want to use. And we can even save these between different websites. So for example, if I click more styles here, we can see apply saved styles. And these are some colors I used on a previous website and actually I really liked it. So let's use these colors on this website as well. It's also page transitions if we want to transition between pages. And then there's this apps section where we can install different apps if we want to use that. And then we also have this CMS section if we want to work with a CMS. And then finally, my favorite section, the custom code. So this allows us to write custom code. So for example, I can open this mainpage.js and we can just write normal JavaScript code right here, or we can click code in Wix IDE and it's going to open up VS Code. And we can also add CSS. So if I click add global CSS, we can write some CSS code here as well. We'll be doing that in a minute. Okay, so what I'm thinking for this example website is we're going to build a wedding photography website. So let's come back up here to our layers and let's start with the section at the top here, which is the header. So the first thing I'm going to do is open this up and we can make some changes here. So first of all, I don't actually want this horizontal menu with the home button. So I'm going to simply delete this. And there's also this image here. If I show this, it was a hamburger icon that only is supposed to show on mobile, but we don't need this either. So let's go ahead and delete that as well. Now we have this business name, which is this box 1 with a vector image and some text. So let's go into the image first of all. Let's change it. So there's lots of different images we can use from Wix. What I want to do is use a camera to sort of be our logo. So let's find a good one. I like this one here. So let's add that to the page. And then let's change the business name as well. So I'll hit edit text and we can change this to whatever we want our business name to be. I'll make this Ardman Wedding Photography. And I spelled photography wrong. So let's fix that. And I'll make this a little bit wider so that it's all in one line. All right, but now in the heading, I do want one more thing, and that's going to be a button to actually contact us. So I'm going to come up here to this add elements section. We can go down to buttons and let's go with this sort of shop now format. So let's move this up here. I'm thinking at the top right of our header. And I'm going to change the text and the icon. I actually think the icon is good, but let's change this from shop now to, instead of contact us, let's go with get in touch. And maybe we want the I to be capital. So get in touch like that. And now if we want, we can actually preview what we've done so far. So if we click this preview button, we can see we have Ardman Wedding Photography and we have get in touch. And this sort of button style by default is going to be blue on hover. But one thing I think would be cool is if on hover, if this little icon sort of shifted over to the right a little bit. And there's probably a few ways we could do that, but I think one good option here is going to be to use custom CSS. So let's go into our code and open up global.css. And what we can actually do here is just select this element, and it's going to show us over here what the different classes are that are actually associated with it. So I'll go ahead and delete this code here. And what we want to do is whenever you hover over the entire button, we want to move that icon. So I can see we have the .button class. And what I want with this is the hover pseudo class, but we don't want to be moving the whole button. We just want to be moving the icon. So I can see we have the button icon inside of it. So we can do .button __ icon. And now when we're in this hovered state, we want to move the icon, let's say maybe like 5 pixels to the right. So we can say transform, translate X, and let's do 5 pixels. Okay, so now let's come back over to our preview. And now if I hover over this, we can see the icon sort of animates to the right a little bit, which I think looks pretty cool. So let's go back to edit site. And I think we can say we're done with that. So I think I'm happy with that, and we can say the header is done for now. Okay, so now we're here in the code editor, and I'm going to try my best to build the exact same website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just completely vanilla. I will probably have to speed this up a bit just so the video is not like 2 hours long, but I'll try to explain my process as I go. So to start out, we have just a boilerplate HTML file with a link tag to a CSS file and a script for script.js. So the CSS file is empty and script.js is also empty. Now we can start with the header section. So that's going to contain the navbar as well as the sort of hero section. So I'll say we have a header, and this is going to contain a navbar. I also just went ahead and grabbed this arrows image as well as this camera. So similar images to what we are using in the Wix Studio version of the website. So now we can add some divs. So let's say we have a div, and this one is going to represent the sort of logo and title of the website section. So first we're going to have an image tag, and this will be source is going to be the camera. So we can say camera.png, and we need an alt attribute. So let's say camera icon, and then we can add some text in here as well. We could use a heading or a paragraph here. I'll just use a paragraph and say Aardman wedding photography. And now we can see in our output, we have Aardman wedding photography, and the image is here. It's just hard to see because it's actually white, but we will be able to see that in a minute when we add the background. And of course it's way too big, so it's pushing everything down, but we will worry about that in a moment. So what I'm actually going to do is come over to style.css, just select the body and give it a background color of something like blue, just so that we can actually see what we're doing. And then I will remove that in a minute. Now let's add the sort of CTA, the call to action as well. So let's say we have another div, and this one's going to have the text of something like get in touch. And then we'll also add an image below this with the source attribute of arrows.png, and alt attribute, we can say arrows icon. Okay, so now I will save this, and now we have get in touch and this big icon here. Of course, we need to fix all of this CSS. So I'm going to do my best to do this. I'll probably speed through this section so you don't have to watch me fiddle with the CSS too much, but I'll see what I can do. Okay, so now I have something fairly similar to the navbar we had in Wix Studio, with the one exception being we don't have the sort of hover animation yet for get in touch. So what I'm going to do is select our nav CTA when it is hovered and get the image inside of it. And we're going to update the transform property, and we still need to have it rotated. So this is important because if we didn't have it rotated, we'd be facing the wrong direction. So we need it to still be rotated, but then we also want to move it over. So we can say translate X and maybe like 4 pixels. So let's try that. Now when we hover, and it looks like it's going the wrong direction, so let's do -4 pixels, hover over, and that's working, but we do want it to slowly transition. So let's add the transition property. I don't know, maybe like 0.5 seconds. Hover over this, and yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I do, however, think we might want to just add some padding to everything. So let's just go to the overall header, add some padding, maybe vertical like 1 rim and horizontal like 3. Maybe that's a bit much, maybe like 1 and 2. Yeah, I think that looks potentially a little bit better. Okay, so now I want to move on to this sort of main hero section. And because this is a wedding photography website, I want that to be sort of front and center with a big image of some wedding photography. So what I'm going to do first is select one of these layout options. So I'm going to go with the 2 rows like this. And let's actually make this, instead of scale proportionately, fit to screen, which is going to make it fit to the whole screen. And then let's make the top section much bigger than this bottom section, which we can make pretty small. Okay, so now let's come down into here and click Add Media, and I want to get a just big image of some wedding. So let's say wedding, and see if we can find something good. I think this one, this wedding embrace, might work pretty well. So let's add that to the page, and we can see we have it down here. And now with this image, let's change the responsive behavior to scale proportionately. And then what I want to do is actually make it go all the way up to the top, and it's going to sort of overflow out of this container. So let's set the X value to be 0, the top value to be something like -1000, the width to be the entire width, so 1280, and the height to be something like, I don't know, let's say 1300 for now. Okay, so now we can see we have this big image like this, and I think that looks pretty good to me. But we are going to want to have text on top of this image. So to do that, we need to darken it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is increase this background of black to be 100%, and move the image opacity down to let some of that black sort of shine through. So let's maybe go to 70%. This is going to make it easier to put text on top. But now you might be noticing we can't even see our header anymore. So let's go back to our layers and go to this section and go to arrange, and we can move this to the back. And now we can see the header on top of it again. But now with the header, I don't necessarily want this gray background. I just want it directly on top of this image. So let's take this and move the background color to 0. But now I do think having a lighter color text up here will look better. So let's come into here, and we're going to change the text from, instead of being this black color, to instead being a lighter color. So let's go with this theme color up here. And I'll do the same thing for the icon as well. So we can change this color to be this one, and same thing over here with Get in Touch as well. So we can come down here, update the text to have a color that's going to be this theme color. Then we also need to do the same thing for the icon. So the icon color is going to be this theme color, and I think that just looks a little bit better. Now we can also preview this, and we can see we now have this sort of big hero image with Aardman Wedding Photography and Get in Touch, and our animation here is still working as well. Okay, so now what I'm thinking is we add some text on top of the hero image. So let's come over here to this Add Element section. We can go to Text, and I actually like this text mask section. These just look pretty cool to me. So let's add this one in, and I'm going to put it up here, and then we can say Change Text, and instead of Let's Talk, let's do something like Get the Perfect Shot. And now we can't actually see this, so let's come in to the box that contains the text mask and move it to the front. So now we have this text, and I will make it a bit bigger. And then what I want to do is, instead of having this sort of video type of thing playing, I want to change this to be a gradient. And what I'm thinking with the gradient is, let's just make it 2 colors. So I'll delete this color, and over here at the left side, let's select some kind of sort of sandy-like color. And then for around the middle, I will change it to be our standard theme color. And we can sort of play with this how we want it. Maybe I want this to be a bit darker to have a bit more of a difference. Maybe move it like this. That looks pretty good to me. Of course, we could perfect this if we want, but I like the way this is turning out. I also want to have some kind of chevron type of icon to show that you can actually scroll down and that this page isn't just this one big image. So what I'm going to do is come over to the Add Elements section, and we can add, this time, just a quick add and then a shape. And I'll move the shape down here. And then what I want to do is change this to be some kind of like chevron icon, so we can scroll through all of these different shapes that we have. Let's see if we can find something that'll work well. I want something sort of like this, but I'm thinking we want like a double icon. So let's see, I think this will look good. So let's add this to the page. Then of course we need to rotate it. So let's go down to adjust and rotate. This is going to be 90 degrees? No, 270. There we go. So now it is pointed down. Let's also change the color to be our theme color. And I also think this will look cool if it expands and sort of gets bigger as we hover over it. And we could use custom CSS for that again, but we can also use the built-in animations. So let's go to animations and effects. We can go to hover, add an effect, and let's add an expand effect. And we'll see now if we preview this and we put our mouse over it, it's just going to expand a little bit. And thinking of animations, we can also add some animations for the entrance of all of these elements. So for example, with the chevron, let's add an animation and maybe have this one just float in, and we can see sort of what that looks like. Then we can add animations for these other things too. So let's add an animation for this main text. And for this one, maybe we want to glide in from the side, or we could try doing float for this one as well. Let's see what that looks like. Of course, we could adjust these if we want. So we can go to adjust, maybe float from the left. And now this is going to sort of float in from this side. And I think that looks pretty good. And let's actually do the same thing with the header. So let's take this top left part of the heading and let's have this entrance float, adjust the animation and go from the left as well. And then let's go to the get in touch and we can have this have an entrance that floats, but this time we're going to float from the right. Now we can see if we preview this on the initial load, all of the different elements sort of float into the page, and I think that looks pretty nice. Okay, so now that we have a section complete, I do think it's a good idea to take a bit of a pause and make sure that everything is working on different screen sizes as well. So let's go to tablets for a moment, and that looks fine to me. Maybe we can make this a little bit bigger. So actually, if we change anything here on the tablet section, for the most part, it's just going to affect tablets. So for example, I can make this text much bigger for the tablets and maybe move this down. And let's say maybe right here. And we can actually maybe make this a bit bigger as well. Maybe not quite that big. And then let's put it back in the center. And I think that looks better for the tablets. And we can see if we go back to our main desktop version, it's going to be the same. And then we have our mobile, and I think this is where it's starting to look a little bit funky. So first of all, we just have too much in the header for mobile. So let's go here to our text. And I actually think on mobile, we just don't want the text at all. So let's just say hide this text completely, and we can just use the camera as like a logo. But now we can see if we come back to the others, we still have that text. So essentially this works sort of like a media query. Next on mobile, I think we also probably want to make this a lot bigger. So let's go like that. Also maybe make this bigger and put it in the middle down here somewhere. And also I think the image is just a little bit too far off to the right for my liking. So let's go to the image and maybe say X like negative 100 pixels to move it over. I guess we need to make it wider as well. So this be 490 pixels, maybe a little bit further actually. So maybe like negative 200 pixels. I just want to get more of this couple actually in the image. Let's make this like 600. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit better like that. Okay, so now I'm going to come back to our HTML and let's also inside of the header add this main sort of hero section. So let's add another div to contain this. And then we're going to need that text. So I will put this in an H1. This is going to say get the perfect shot. And that is what we want, but we do want these to each be on new lines. So I'm actually just going to add a line break like this between each word. And now we have get the perfect shot and it is vertical. And I'll give this a class as well to make it easier to select. So let's call this our header content. Okay, so let's come over to the CSS now. And what I'm going to do is try to add that big image. So let's come into the header. And what I think we want to do is make it just a background image. So let's say background image is going to be a URL with the wedding main.webp image. But we do need this to be bigger. So let's say background size is going to be cover. And we also need to give this some kind of height. So let's say height is going to be 100% of the viewport. So 100 VH. And that is looking a little bit better. And we can see the blue behind it. I think that's because of the margins on the body. So let's say margin 0 here. And yeah, that looks a little bit better to me. Yeah, now we have our image. It's definitely not perfect just yet, but it's definitely getting there. So one thing I want to do is darken this image the way that we had it on Wix Studio to make the text on top easier to actually read. And there's a few ways we could do that, but I think what we should do is use a linear gradient. So we can say linear gradient, and we'll also still have the same background image. And we can say this is going to be RGBA, and we'll just do 0, 0, 0, something like maybe 0.3. And we're going to want the gradient to just be this exact same thing twice. And that will sort of darken that image. So that's a cool little trick if you've never seen that before. If you want to darken an image, there's lots of ways to do it, but one easy way is add a linear gradient. And depending on what these numbers are going to be, it'll change how dark you actually make it. So if I made this, say like 0.1, we would see it's not quite as dark as like 0.3. And if I made this, say 1, well, now this is just going to be completely black. And if you wanted to, you could have these be different values as well. So this could be something like 0.8 to 0.3, and you can see it's darker at the top and it gets lighter at the bottom. But in this case, I'll just make it all one color. Okay, so next, what I want to do is make this text be sort of that gradient text like we had in Wix Studio, which is also a little bit complicated to do with just CSS, but there are ways we can do it. So what we want to do is set the color of the text to, first of all, just be transparent. And that's going to make it so that we can't see the text at all. But then we're going to add a background image to this text. So first of all, we can say background clip, and this is going to be text. And then we can add in the background image, which is going to be a gradient. So we can say background image is going to be a linear gradient. And what we want here is that sort of sandy color we had. So I'm just going to put all zeros here for a second. And then I actually did copy over the color that we had as sort of our main accent color from Wix Studio, which is this color here. So if I just save this like this, we can see we get from black to this color. But what I want is for this one to be some sort of like sandy-ish color. So let's come in here, maybe something like that. Oops, didn't mean to change the styling. Do that. And that's somewhat similar to what we had. I think that might be a little bit too yellow, maybe something like that. Okay, and then we're actually going to be using this color a lot. So what I'm going to do is save it in a variable. So let's say variable, I'll call this accent, and let's come all the way up here. We also don't need this line anymore, and we can come up to the root, and I'm just going to add accent as this color here. Now, if I save this, nothing should change because this variable is now this accent color. Okay, so now I'm just going to try my best to move things around and get it all looking similar to how we had it on Wix Studio. So I'll check back in once we get that. All right, so now I think this looks pretty good, and we can see as we scale this up and scale it down, for the most part, it's working pretty well. But what I do want to do is add a media query so that when it gets super small like this, we just get rid of the Aardman wedding photography text like we did in Wix Studio. So let's come all the way down here and we can add a media query. So we'll say at media, and let's add a max width of say 768 pixels, which is just a common number we use to represent mobile. And I am missing a colon here. And what we want in here is to get the nav title, and we want that paragraph inside of it to just be display none. So now it's still there, but if we make this smaller, eventually it goes away, which is what we wanted. I also think the image looks good like this, but once it gets too small, it sort of goes off the side, which looks a little bit awkward. So let's add another media query. So we can come here and let's do this one. 1024, which is what we generally use for like a medium size screen. And in this case, we don't need this, but what I'm going to do is say header, and let's take the background position to be top. And that's just going to move these guys over a little bit. And then we'll see as we get bigger, it puts it back to where it was by default. I think potentially also this text is too far over in this case. So let's also say H1. Let's add, was it padding or margin that we used to move this over? We had margin left of 2. So maybe here just say margin left of like 1 instead, just to move it over a tad. Next, we can also add in that sort of chevron icon down here. So let's go back here, and below our H1, let's add a new div, and this div is going to contain an image, and this image is actually just going to be the same arrows again. So let's say source is arrows.png, and alt, we can say scroll down icon. And now we can see we get this big image here, but of course we don't need it to be this big, so we can come into our CSS and make it a bit smaller. And I'll also give this a class, so we can say class is going to be our scroll icon container. And let's also wrap this in an anchor tag, because eventually we're going to want to be able to click on this. And when we click on it, we want to go down to that next section we'll be implementing. But for now, I'll just leave it as an empty anchor tag, and let's come over to our CSS. Okay, so I added a hover effect to this and just sort of moved it around a bit. So now when we hover over this, it gets bigger, sort of like it did in Wix Studio. And I'll add an href to this anchor tag once we have a section below it, and that will go ahead and automatically scroll for us. Okay, so now what I want to do is add another section below, and there's a few ways to do this, but honestly one of the easiest, just to come to any of the sections and duplicate it. So I'm going to add a duplicate section down here, and in this duplicate section, I'm just going to delete everything that is inside. So let's delete that box and delete this box as well. And now we just have this big old section right here. But of course, we don't need this to be quite so big, so I'm just going to shrink it down, maybe a little bit bigger than that, something like this. And now what I want to do with this section is make sort of a cool animation where there's going to be text horizontally scrolling, and it's going to scroll as you scroll down the page. So what I want to do is go to quick add and add some text. So let's go to text here, go to just text themes, and we can add some paragraph text. What I'm going to do with this is change it to say something that looks sort of cool and dramatic. So let's go with memories, and then a vertical bar, and then love, and then another vertical bar, and memories again. And then let's take this text, make it way bigger. So maybe font size 100. And then instead of scale proportionately, I'm going to make it hug, so that it's going to be the width of the content. Okay, so now with that, what I want to do is make one more of these. So I'm going to duplicate this. And then what we want to do with the duplicate is put some different text in it. So let's go to edit text. And instead of memories and love, let's go with maybe celebrate and together. And then we can make this last one at the end also be celebrate. Okay, so now let's take these two pieces of text and sort of center them like this. And then I'm going to take the two and actually stack them. Now, I think we could add some more space between them. So let's change the item spacing instead of this negative 1.2% to 0, which is just going to add some vertical space. I think I also might want to change the background color of this section to just be white. So let's make that white. And then what we want to do is add in the animations. So let's select the first text. We can go, instead of an entrance animation, down to a scroll animation, click add, and we're going to do a move on scroll, and we will adjust the animation. We want this to come from the side. So let's do 270 degrees. We want the animation area to be 0 to 100%. And now we can do the same thing with the other text. So scroll, add a scrolling animation, move, adjust animation, and this time instead of 270 degrees, we'll do 90 degrees to come from the other direction and increase the animation area again to 100%. Now you'll see if I preview this, as we scroll, we should see the text actually moving from the left and from the right. And as we have more below this, we'll see it go sort of all the way across. And now again, let's just very quickly make sure this actually works on different screen sizes. So on a tablet, I think we just want to make this smaller for the tablet. So let's do that. Make sure we still have our desktop looking the same. And then we have the tablet. And then we can go to mobile as well and just make this a bit smaller. And other than that, I think we are mostly good. We might want to also make the section above it a bit smaller on mobile as well. And I think that'll look a little bit better. And that also moved the image a little bit. So let's move this image actually down. So I think we want like maybe -900 here. And I think that looks a bit better. And of course, if this was a real project, we could spend more time getting everything absolutely perfect. But I think that is good for now. All right, so now let's come down below our header and we're going to add the scroll text section. So we can say section, and I'll actually give this an ID so that we can actually link to it from this anchor tag. So we can say ID is going to be scroll text section, and we can close out that section. And I'll go ahead and add this href here before I forget. So this is going to go to here. And then inside of the section, we just need our 2 paragraphs. So the first one is going to say memories, the vertical bar, love, and then memories again. And then the second one is going to say celebrate, the vertical bar, together, and celebrate again. And I'll give both of these a class. So we can say class is going to be equal to, say, scroll text. And the same thing will be true here. So class equals scroll text. We can save this and we can see that text is down here, as well as this will automatically bring us down there. We can come to the root as well if we want, and we can say scroll behavior is going to be smooth. So now it's going to smoothly scroll us down to this section. Now I'll add some CSS as well, just to try to make it look similar to how it looks in Wix Studio, but this one might take me a minute to figure out, but I will try my best. Okay, so now I have this sort of how I want it, and we're actually going to be using this transform property using JavaScript to sort of move these things around. And my plan is essentially to come to our JavaScript and I'm going to listen to the scroll event. And whenever we scroll, I'm going to recalculate what the translate X value should actually be. And hopefully we can use that to properly create this effect.
One eternity later.
Okay, yeah, so I think this is actually working now. So as I scroll, we can see the text sort of comes in from the 2 sides, and we can see as I make this bigger, it does the same thing. And if I was scrolling past it, it would, I believe, continue to do this. So yeah, it seems to be working pretty well. Essentially, all I do here is listen for any scroll event on the window, and then I calculate for both of the scroll text elements, essentially where they should be based on how far down the viewport the first scrolling element is. I actually should probably be using the first one, not the second one. So however far down we are based on that, I sort of do some math to try to figure out exactly what the offset should be. And then we set the translate X value. I'm not going to go into all of this exact math. To be honest, I'm not even sure that it's like perfectly correct, but it seems to be working good enough. Okay, so now I want to add another section to actually sort of showcase what it is that we can do, what work we are doing, and sort of some selling points of this photography business. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate this section again. I think that's just generally a pretty simple way to do things, and delete the contents of it. And for this new section, well, first of all, I want to switch the order. So let's move this down below. And then what I want to do with this new section is put the background color back to this sort of theme color here. And what I want in this section is to have 2 sort of sections. So we're going to have a heading for it and then some bullet points down below. So let's say 2 rows like this. And then in the top one, what we're going to do is add some text. So let's say this is going to be like a heading 2. And let's make this text say something like maybe the Ardman difference. I think that sounds cool. Maybe we should have this be lowercase. So the Ardman difference like this. And then let's make this whole portion a bit smaller and maybe move this off to the left as well. So something like that. And then in this section, what I want to do is add a few different bullet points. So I'm going to go back to add elements. We're going to go to layout tools, and then we're going to go to a repeater. So this allows you to have multiple sort of the same style of thing. What I want is this one here. So we're going to have a list of 3 elements. Okay, so now what I'm thinking is we can use little camera icons as like bullet points. So I'm going to go back up to quick add, and let's get a shape, and let's change the shape to be a camera. Let's use this one here, and we can see we actually end up with a shape in all of them, but we will need to update the specific shape individually. So we can say camera, camera, and this will also be a camera. And then we also want to add some text. So let's go back to quick add again, and then we can go actually down to text and just add a paragraph. We can see we end up with a paragraph in each one. So let's edit the text in the first one. And instead of this long paragraph, let's just add some point about why we are so good. So maybe we can say 20 plus years of experience. But now, of course, this text is like overlapping with the image, which is not good. So let's move the image over to the left, and you can see they're all actually going to move. And we can move the text over to the right and make sure this isn't able to get out of the box. And now we can just come to the other boxes and change the text here as well. So in this second one, let's say something like expert, lighting, and composition. And then for the final one, let's come down here, and maybe we can just put something simple like dedicated service. And now what I'm thinking is these icons are probably way too big, so let's make them smaller. And then we can vertically center them, and then maybe take the text and make it a bit bigger, something like 24 point. But now it is not quite fitting. There we go, that fits better. And then I think we can take the whole thing and maybe move it over to the left a bit. Okay, so now I'm pretty happy with how this little section looks. Of course, it could look better, but I think it's a good place to leave it for now. Let's also go over to the other sizes. So tablet looks good to me, and mobile looks fine, but it's definitely too small. So what I'm actually going to do is use this AI tool. So we can just put responsive AI and hit generate mobile. And what it's going to do is generate a mobile version of this for us. We can see how it ends up looking, and then we can decide if we want to use it or not. Okay, so this is what it generated for the mobile version of this section, and I actually don't think it's too bad. So let's say apply design, and then let's actually move these onto the same lines as the cameras instead of having them sort of below the camera like it had it. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with how it did this. Maybe we move this over, or actually let's just make the camera icons just a tad smaller, and then maybe move the text over a little bit, make sure it's still vertically centered. And yeah, I think this section looks pretty good now, and it was done sort of automatically by the AI. Coming back to the HTML, what I want to do is add this same section. So let's say section, and I'll give this a class of, let's call this the difference section. And then we can add in a heading, maybe an H2, call this the Ardman difference. And then we want those bullet points, which I will make be an unordered list. So we can say UL, and then we want all of the different list items. And I just went ahead and got the sort of dark version of the camera image. So now we have that. So we can add into the list item an image tag with the source of camera dark.png. Alt is going to be camera icon. And the first one is going to say 20 plus years of experience. I'll save this to make sure that we can see it. And we do see it here. So the Ardman difference, 20 plus years of experience. Obviously the CSS needs some work, but let's copy this 3 times for the 3 different bullet points. This one is going to be expert, lighting, and composition. composition. And then this one down here is going to be dedicated service. And now again, I'll do my best to make the CSS look like it did in Wix Studio. All right, so again, I'm not going to say this is absolutely perfect, but I think this looks pretty good. So we have the Aardman difference, and then we have all of our text here, which I made a lot bigger, and we have these images that sort of act as the bullet points. And all I did was make the list style type be none, and we used flex to flex the images next to the text. Okay, now finally, I want to add one last section to sort of show off some of our work and maybe have like some testimonials. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this section one more time. So let's say duplicate section. And in this new section down here, what I want to do again is just delete all of the contents. So let's say delete and delete. And for this section, I do want to have a white background to sort of alternate between the two colors. And then what we're going to want to do with this one is do a 2-column layout. And then within this 2-column layout, I'm actually going to make it super tall. So let's drag this down a good bit to make this a lot taller to have some more space to work with. What I want to do in here is add some different images and testimonials of our work. Okay, so first let's come over here, maybe go to add media and just add some different wedding photo in here. So let's find a good wedding photo that we can just pretend is some of our work. So let's go with this wedding portrait here. I will add this to the page. And now I don't need this to be quite so big. So instead of stretch, let's go with scale proportionately so that I can more so decide how big I want this image to be. And I think something like that is going to be good. Maybe even not quite that big. So let's go with this. And then let's add some text down below it. So we can go to add text and a heading. I guess we can go with like a heading 3 here. And this will be the name of this couple. So let's say this is Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And then below that, let's add one more piece of text. And this is going to be their testimonial. And then let's make this italic to better show that it is a quote. Okay, so this is looking good, but I think we want this to be a bit wider like this. And then let's take Mr. and Mrs. Smith, maybe move it over like that, and then take the quote and center it like that. And then what we're going to do is take all 3 of these elements and stack them together. And now all I'm going to do is duplicate this a couple times and change the images as well as the actual text. And then let's see how this looks in a preview. So we can see if we come all the way up to the top, we have these animations. As we scroll down, we have this animation here, we have the Aardman difference, and then we have these different testimonials. And finally, we have the footer. So we can actually real quick come in to our footer, and I'm going to leave it how it is, but I'm just going to edit this text. So let's get rid of all of this and say 2024 Aardman wedding photography. And then we also had this icon here that is supposed to be clickable and sort of move you down to the next section, but it's not going to be doing that just yet. So what I'm going to do is take this section here, and I'm going to go down to the bottom and click anchor, and we can add an anchor. And then we can come up to this icon here, and we can say we want to link this, and we want to link it to an anchor. So we can say anchor here, and it's going to be this main page and the section we just added. So now we can say, go to the preview. And when I click on this, it's going to automatically scroll us down the page. And then finally, as a last check, let's see how everything looks on different screen sizes. So first of all, on a tablet, I think this actually looks fairly reasonable. And then on mobile, I think, again, it looks fairly reasonable. Maybe this section is a bit too much. So let's again do the responsive AI and see if it can make this section be a little bit easier to actually read on a mobile device. All right, so the AI sort of did its thing, and yeah, I think this mostly looks better, except it does look like it sort of stacked two of the items. So what I'm going to do is click Apply Design, and it's not going to be perfect because we do have two of the boxes sort of directly on top of each other. So let's take this one and see if we can just move it down below. So what we're going to need to do is make the section a lot bigger. So let's just keep dragging this to be bigger so that there's going to actually be enough space. And then we can take this one and move it up, and then take this one and move it down. And of course, we'd want to get the spacing all completely perfect. But for now, I'm going to say I think that looks pretty good and we can call it there. All right, so now let's move on to this sort of testimonials section. So let's say we'll have a new section. I'll give this one a class of testimonials. And inside of the section, we want the 2-column layout. So I think the easiest way to do that is just add 2 divs, each with a class of column, and we'll handle that in the CSS. So we have 1 column, and then we'll add another column. So class equals column. Okay, so now we have our 2 columns, and in each column, we want the individual testimonials. So we can say div class equals testimonial. And I just went and grabbed 3 different wedding images that we can use as our sort of fake wedding photography. So in the first testimonial, we'll have an image, and the source is going to be wedding. Oops, this needs to go inside of the quotes, wedding-1.webp. And then our alt attribute will be, let's just say wedding photo for now. And then we can come down below and add an H2. This will be Mr. and Mrs. Smith in this case. And then we can add a paragraph as well with the testimonial. And I'll just copy and paste this testimonial in. Now, if I scroll down, we can see we have this image, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and our testimonial. So I'll copy the other testimonials in as well, and then do some work on the CSS. Okay, so I think I mostly have this figured out, and it's pretty similar to what we had before. So we have our testimonials with our columns, and this is all just using Flex. And then I added to our media queries down here. If we are on a mobile device, we're going to change the testimonials to be Flex Direction column and to just be wider. So that way, when we get really small, we go into this single column layout that would be readable from a mobile phone. And lastly, I'll also add in the footer. So let's come down below here. So we can say footer. This is going to have a paragraph, and we can say copyright, and we can do the escape character. So and copy, and let's say 2024 Ardman wedding photography. Save this, and we see it down here. But let's go into our styles real quick, make the footer look a bit better. So we can say footer text align center, and let's add a background color too. So we can say background color is going to be that accent color. Save this, and we also want some padding. So let's say padding maybe 4 rem. Save this like this, and I think that's a bit too much, maybe 2, maybe even just 1.5. Yeah, I think that looks good to me. And of course, if we did want to add in some more scroll animations and things like that, like we can very easily with Wix Studio, we'd either just have to do them using CSS and JavaScript, or we could use a library like Animate on Scroll. But for now, I'm just going to leave this coding version of the website like this. I think it is pretty close to what we had in Wix Studio, although maybe not quite as complete. All right, so is Wix Studio going to be taking over my entire development workflow? And if so, when will I actually be using it? Well, where I think it actually shines is for agencies and freelancers and people sort of doing work like that. If that's you, this is an intuitive tool you can use to legitimately build websites much more efficiently. For example, in this video, building the code version of this website took significantly longer than doing it on Wix Studio, and the result was actually better on Wix Studio. Plus, you get this entire ecosystem of tooling that's already built into Wix Studio, and as a result of that, you oftentimes are able to build things that you probably wouldn't be able to build on your own, or if you were trying to build on your own, would be very difficult to actually do. And where a lot of other tools have fallen short for me in the past is in customizability. I shouldn't be able to look at your website and say, oh, that was definitely made with this tool. But with Wix Studio, you do get a deep level of customizability because you have that ability to write pretty much whatever code you want. So ultimately, Wix Studio can be a great tool for small and medium-sized business websites. But they also have enterprise tooling that can scale with the largest of clients. So if you do want to give it a try, check the link at the top of the description, and I'll see you in the next video.